bit different than what you have in your program, but epiphanies happen and then changes are made. I'm from Dartmouth College, a rising senior, and so this is what I've been working on. By the end of the United States 2008 presidential election, Barack Hussein Obama was set to occupy the seat of leadership of one of the most powerful nations in the world. In the hours following his victory, images of warm embraces and joyful sobs flooded myriad news channels across the United States. But there were other celebrations also taking place. 5,276 miles away in the town of Muğla, along the Aegean coast of Turkey, members of the Afro-Turk Culture and Solidarity Association gathered together in celebration of Barack Obama's presidency. They moved through the streets carrying banners for Obama that read, "Seni Muğla'ya bekliyoruz. Afro-Türkler seni seviyor. We await you in Muğla. Afro-Turks love you." This image raises a critical question. Why did this particular body of people feel so invested in the Barack Obama presidency halfway around the globe that they not only celebrated, but also gathered in the streets of Muğla as a visible presence in Obama's name? An answer to this question can be pieced together in light of Mustafa Olpak's words, the founder of the Afro-Turk Culture and Solidarity Association. When he was asked, why the streets, why Obama, and why Muğla, Olpak responds that it's because nobody speaks about us. For if they did, they would find themselves in conflict with the official version of history. Members of the Afro-Turk Culture and Solidarity Association essentially use Barack Obama as a platform upon which they can speak about themselves and bring themselves into representation, despite the fact that their situation is not the same as Barack Obama's. This is important to highlight. Barack Obama and the members of the Afro-Turk Culture and Solidarity Association are not in the same situation. In the United States, Barack Obama is black. In Turkey, although we can see that the Afro-Turk Culture and Solidarity Association has the familiar Afro in its title, the usage of Afro is a recent phenomenon. These particular bodies are and have been historically termed Siyah, Zenci, and Arap by the dominant culture. Siyah and Zenci specifically referring to the color black, while Arap literally means Arab. Yet the three terms are used interchangeably. The differences in meaning create a tension that prevents Siyah, Zenci, and Arap from collapsing into a racial category, and in fact signify that a racial analysis has no basis within this work. Herein lies the difficulty. How can we make sense? How can we understand the mechanisms of othering, the mechanisms of exclusion that do act upon certain bodies like the members of the Afro-Turk Solidarity and Culture Association without inscribing this racial framework that has proven itself inapplicable? A return to Olpak's words regarding an official version of history provide a starting point for this analysis. History's official version points to a connection between social exclusion and an exclusion from a nation's official rendering of itself. This link, though, is neither novel nor arbitrary. Nation theorist Ernest Renan, in his seminal What is a Nation, speaks to how this historical exclusion is paramount in the process of nation building. He remarks that forgetting, even beyond forgetting, historical error is a crucial factor in the creation of a nation. But this erasure, by way of historical error and forgetting, necessarily implies a collective memory upon which the nation is built. Collective memory becomes the communicative underpinnings that situate political and cultural practices and that justify a nation's exclusionary politics. It not only frames a body of people's perceptions of the world, but also how this body understands itself. As such, the collective memory engenders the nation's imaginary, the ideas, images, and metaphors a nation uses to speak about itself to itself. This imaginary signals to a population who and what is, along with who and what is not. Within this framework, I argue That is, collective memory are the practices through which the nation's imaginary is mitigated, and exploration of one particular memory practice, literary folklore, within the context of Turkey can be used to explore the Turkish popular imaginary. For this work, I employed the use of textual analysis. The two particular texts I evaluated were a Turkish folk song by the name of Arap Kızı and a folk tale by the name of Üç Pınar. It is important to note that these two texts are neither classical nor canonical. The prevalence of the song Arap Kızı provided me with a starting point, the term Arap Kızı itself. But finding texts that use the term or a variation of it proved incredibly difficult. The larger idea, though, is not at what point the folk text evolved, but rather that because the folk text is a folk text, it inherently provides a look into the Turkish collective memory, and by extension, into the Turkish popular imaginary. The first text in this discussion is the folktale Üç Pınar, or Three Springs. The presence of the Arap Kızı is relevant both by imagery and plotline. Throughout the tale, the Arap Kızı is described as nothing short of ugly, dumpy, frumpy, and stupid, until she emerges from this giant fish a changed being. The change is of particular interest, for as you may note, the Arap Kızı emerges a woman of a lighter complexion and thinner frame. Arap Kızı is also the name of the Turkish popular song I use in this analysis. It is generally sung by young children playing in the streets, and its short 4-line chorus is often produced and reproduced from children's games to television. Yağmur yağıyor, seller akıyor, Arap Kızı camdan bakıyor. It is raining, it is pouring, the Arap Kızı watches from the window. The immediate questions that came to my mind were, why is the resolution to a story the transformation of a woman from dark and frumpy to light and thin? What does it mean? And why is there an Arap Kızı watching from the window? What is she doing there? Whose is the point of view that sees her? I assert that the Arap Kızı's transformation embodies a notion present within the collective memory that all that is the Arap Kızı, all the dumpy and frumpy and dark that Arap Kızı represents, cannot and does not coexist with this new light figure. Further, the Arap Kızı, looking through the window, separate, apart, distinct from that which is taking place outside of her, is the literary articulation of the Arap Kızı's perceived distance and difference from the Turkish nation that is looking back at her. Looking at the use of Arap Kızı within these two folk texts, I conclude that negotiated within the collective memory of the Turkish nation and floating within the popular imaginary exists an ambiguously colored yet definitively distinct entity that I term the chromatic other. The chromatic other allows us to make sense of a category that has no consistent logic and is not consistently understood, but is immediately recognizable as abject. It is chromatic insofar that it pertains to color, yet is not about color. Of greatest relevance is its separation, its distance, its difference from the national identity construction. In Üç Pınar and Arap Kızı, this chromatic other is articulated through the role of the Arap Kızı, but is not the Arap Kızı herself. These two folk texts signal an oppositional framing of Arap Kızı-ness in relation to Turkish-ness. The chromatic other, literarily embodied as the Arap Kızı in these folk texts, can then be understood as directly oppositional to Turkishness. As such, it is incompatible with the hegemonic construction of Turkish national identity. On television, on the radio, and in books, the metaphors, images, and ideas that discursively construct the Turkish imaginary's chromatic other are constantly reproduced. These findings offer a way to understand the mechanisms of othering that act upon Afro, Zenci, Siyah, and Arap bodies, potentially providing a starting point for deconstructing them. When I started my project, I was grappling with calling these bodies black. I couldn't figure out any other framework, but I didn't have any other words. But that's the thing about the chromatic other. It enables us to examine processes of othering that happen within different contexts. Yet the idea of the chromatic other itself, or solidified within the national imaginary and national subconsciousness, is particularly troubling for the bodies that are subject to it. How can the chromatic other ever be reconciled with a national identity?